good morning from the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. On behalf of the Atlantic Council and the Policy Center for the New South, we are glad to celebrate today Africa Day 2025 with you, as in years past. And allow me, since I mentioned the Policy Center for the New South, our more than 10-year partner, I would like to recognize the presence of the Ambassador of Morocco in Washington, D.C., His Excellency Youssef Amrani. Thank you, Ambassador. So there is a lot to celebrate, indeed. Africa is the cradle of humankind, with 54 nations, 2,000 languages, the highest levels of human genetic diversity on the planet, a population that is expected to double by the year 2050 and become the world's most populous region. Africa is home of 30% of the world's critical mineral reserves. There is no green technology without Africa. The continent is home to the highest number of satellite launch in the world over the past 5 years. It is home to almost half of the world's fastest growing economies in 2024, the largest free trade area in the world, and the biggest digital revolution in the last 2 decades. I would be pleased to continue like this and share these achievements with you, because this is the reality of the African century that nobody will tell you on your television. This new African reality cannot be ignored anymore. These shifts are so powerful that they will impact the entire world. From Washington, after 100 days of the new administration, the vision can be summarized in 2 words: aid and trade. Aid with the end of the USAID, trade with the tariff increase and the new commercial policy. Good news, bad news, our speakers will discuss these seismic changes today. I would like to thank you for accepting to join this panel exclusively dedicated to think tanks, because we wanted the best experts in Washington to read and analyze these powerful shifts and what we should expect from them. So thank you, Bemba, Dave, Ottaviano, and Zainab. The discussion will be moderated by Colin Coleman. Colin is a senior fellow with the Atlantic Council Africa Center and a South African banker based in Johannesburg. He was the former partner and CEO for Goldman Sachs in Sub-Saharan Africa and a former adjunct professor at Columbia Business School. In the 80s, he was an anti-apartheid activist deeply involved in South Africa's constitutional transition from apartheid to democracy. Currently, he's the co-founder and co-chairman of the Youth Employment Service nonprofit, an independent non-executive member of the board of the Foschini Group, a member of the advisory board of Arise, and of Kiosk, among a lot of other things. There was no better profile than his to tackle 25 years of the African century. So Colin, after this, over to you.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks to everybody in person for coming to the Policy Center for the New South, Morocco's largest think tank, for their 10 years of collaboration with the Atlantic Council's Africa Center, and for hosting us today or making this possible. Also, thank you to those online who are participating virtually and whose questions can be welcomed as we conduct this panel. And of course, to my panelists, thanks very much for agreeing to participate here. I must say, this is my first public event for the Atlantic Council since my appointment last year as a senior fellow. And to John Rogers, my former colleague at Goldman Sachs, who's the chairman of the Atlantic Council, Fred Kemp, the CEO, and Ambassador Rama Yade, my thanks for involving me in the Atlantic Council, a very prestigious think tank in Washington, and I'm very glad to be part of it. Today, we have a very exciting moment. The events of yesterday may be fresh in people's mind. As a South African, with the history that Rama has told you, I must say it didn't fill me with great enthusiasm having South Africa, the largest and most sophisticated economy in Africa, described in the way it was in the White House. And there's obviously a long road for us to travel going forward. Let me say, as we talk about Africa, and Rama's given a very good backdrop, I mean, it's hard for people to understand that by the year 2100, 45% of the world's population is forecast to be African. And so we're not talking about some sideshow. in the world. We're talking about something that affects half of humanity. So as we talk about Africa and trade, what I'm going to ask the panelists to do is to share with us their wisdom on a few topics. One, in the context of the new effective wind down of US aid in Africa, what is the impact on aid? What is the impact on people's lives? I think Bill Gates was quoted as saying we have the world's richest man effectively resulting in policies which will effectively kill some of the world's poorest people. So that's the one issue we have to deal with, is how do we manage the fallout of the withdrawal of aid to Africa in regards to HIV, in regards to various forms of poverty relief. Secondly, in the context of the Trump administration's focus on bilateral trade deals, what does that mean for multilateral agreements, in particular AGOA? And we know that AGOA is due effectively to expire in September and either will be renewed or not renewed. And so there's two questions related to that. What happens, what can the African countries do to seek the renewal of AGOA, which was a very favorable trade regime for African countries? What is the consequence going to be of the withdrawal of AGOA? And what does that mean for countries, the 54 African countries, in terms of their negotiating a favorable trade bilateral arrangement with Washington and getting the priority of each country to be recognized and engaged with by the administration in the context of a global reset of trade relations, which is quite difficult. And then obviously, what is it that we can do to effectively strengthen, independent of the counterparties, strengthen African trade, and in particular the AfCFTA, the Continental Free Trade Agreement? What role does that play, and is it happening? I mean, is it, a situation where there's lots of talks and no action, or is it something that we must all watch for? And if you're an African government, how much effort would you be putting into strengthening the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement? And lastly, the question of industries. What really does Africa offer to, firstly, fellow African countries, and secondly, to the world, in terms of fintech, infrastructure, in terms of strategic minerals, and in terms of consumer, the rise of the consumer in Africa. So perhaps, my colleagues, I'm going to start with Zainab. Maybe each panelist, as we engage in the discussion, can just briefly introduce themselves and comment on some of these key features that I've raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colin. Good morning, everyone. Good day, people joining us online from the rest of the world. I'm Zainab Usman. I'm the founding director of the Africa program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which is perhaps a peer sister organization just a few miles from here. This is a very timely discussion for all of the reasons you mentioned, a proximate reason being the press briefing and meeting that happened yesterday in the White House between President Trump and President Ramaphosa. I heard some notes of pessimism in what your own kind of assessment of that meeting, but I would say that ultimately it's a meeting that went better than a lot of us expected. It could have gone terribly in many, many, many ways. And of course, what happens with South Africa will reverberate across the continent, right? This is Africa's most industrialized economy, and for all of the reasons that you mentioned. So a lot of us were watching that meeting, and I think the way it was conducted, there were tense moments, but ultimately, I think both sides were prepared and both sides were willing to kind of concede and listen to one another, and it actually ended cordially. And I would really encourage people to watch the entire video clip itself. It's very, very instrumental for a number of reasons. Now, coming to your specific question, maybe starting with aid very quickly. I think it's really unfortunate that we are seeing I would say the demise of the global aid industry. So this is not just a US phenomenon. Obviously, USAID has been dismantled and it has functionally ceased to exist. But the cuts being made to foreign aid are not just happening in the US. In an analysis that we did at Carnegie last year, as of October, 8 out of the 10 largest donors in the OECD DAC database had announced plans to cut their aid budgets. So perhaps I think the reality is that the world of aid is going to be like a past tense in a sense. So the question for Africa is it really worth, standing in front of a moving train, as I like to put it? If a bullet train is moving, do you want to stand in front of it, or do you want to stand to the side and figure out what to do? I think it should be the latter. I think more broadly too, and maybe this is a bit of a contrarian point, whilst I appreciate and respect all of what has been done with development assistance, the role of, for example, Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation in making headway in eradicating polio, some of the health programs, a lot of scholarships that have gone out to students, Africans, and people from India all over the world, so many good things. And then the tens of thousands of development workers who have devoted their lives and their careers to this work and whose lives are now being upended. At the same time, we have to ask the question, what country has been transformed by development assistance? Is it China? Is it India? Is it like the US? Is it Canada? Is it Australia? Is it Malaysia? Is it Thailand? No. No country has been transformed society-wise, its economy, its people, by aid and development assistance. I think it's always been quite unhelpful also for the image of Africa to be kind of framed through the lens of development assistance. I mean, we all live here in DC, and even with some of the work that we do, oftentimes you want to come up with good ideas and then you're kind of put in the aid bucket. No, you have to frame whatever you want to do within the context of aid and development assistance. So anyways, to conclude on this point, this is now the time for us to think creatively and do things differently. And we can talk about trade and other aspects a little later.
Before we leave that, maybe just to ask you, the slogan, not aid but trade, is a useful one, but in the context where there's a lag between trade and economic growth and the benefits of that, and the withdrawal of effectively the social buffer represented by aid, it's going to have a devastating impact on communities. And what would you advise the governments to be doing themselves with limited budget resources to step into the breach?
Sure. Absolutely. I think I have to indeed acknowledge that for some of the poorest countries that rely on aid, if you look at a metric like official development assistance as a share of gross national income, there are countries like Liberia, Malawi, and a couple of others, Mozambique, that have like more than 10% of aid as a share of GNI. But when you actually look at the specifics, it's probably more than that. There are aid projects that are probably not captured by that metric. So those countries, as South Sudan, others, they do need help, they do need support, and we have to think creatively on that front. But I have to say, this is also another contrarian point of view, but I've always found it odd that a middle-income country, and I love South Africa, but I have to call out South Africa here. I have to call out Nigeria. Why is a middle-income country with global ambitions that wants to be on the UN Security Council still receiving, hundreds of millions of dollars for its health sector? That is absolutely. It's always been a contradiction, and now we've seen that contradiction play out. So, after the announcements were made to cuts to foreign aid, particularly here in the US, a country like Nigeria was able to step in and say, we're going to devote $200 million to cover up for some HIV/AIDS program. Now, what I'll say finally is, we always talk about anti-corruption, and I tend to be quite skeptical of many anti-corruption initiatives because they're badly designed, they don't have local buy-in. This is the time for governments to embark on serious anti-corruption initiatives to retain every cent, every dollar, every shilling, every naira domestically, because the concessional financing is not just going to be forthcoming.
Thank you. Thank you for raising the governance topic. It's a very big one, and I agree entirely. And Wimber, can I come to you and ask you, so how, in the context of the trade dynamics we're discussing, does Africa get its house in order? What is the path for it to sort itself out, independent of the counterparties?
Thank you, Colin. I think Africa is an opportunity here. I mean, Zainab has described the challenges quite well, but I think the primary challenge is African countries as a whole. We have a challenge here. We're talking about 54 countries. How do you design a policy? How do you call everybody up to arms when they're so different? Different perspective, different culture, different experiences. But there's some uniting point here for most of them. It's just a total disregard of the social contract. Yeah? And the disregard of the social contract has led us to everything that we're struggling with. I mean, the countries that are more committed to their citizens, I see the ambassador of Morocco here. I'm a big fan of Morocco because when you go to Morocco, every time you go, you see the change. There's no preaching. Nobody has to have talking point. You'll see it. You see it when you land at the airport. You see it. So, and then you have the other extremes. So to me, on the issues of aid itself, this is a call for African countries to start delivering for themselves. You don't exist as a country to depend on somebody else. We have places where when things go wrong, people literally go protest in front of embassies or in front of the UN office. This is the perversion of the entire state experience for a population, to be looking elsewhere for solutions. I think the policy shift in terms of the African continent, again, it's a very challenging question that you're asking, because I don't believe in the African Union. I think they should pack and go home. They've not delivered. But I believe in RECs, regional economic communities. But RECs can only work if there is a will-be hegemon who can deliver. So Zainab just called out Nigeria, for instance. Well, ECOWAS was my favorite for a long time. It seemed to work when Nigeria could assert the leadership. With all the challenges that Nigeria is facing domestically, it cannot play that role effectively. And we've seen this with the demise of, pretty much the near demise of ECOWAS and the emergence of AES, the alliance of Sahelian states. So we have a problem there.
Cut in and ask you to go a bit into your provocation, yes, because it's a fascinating question, which is the Pan-African institutions created by the African countries, the African Development Bank, the African Union, and so on. Are you suggesting that they are effectively not working, they are and should be replaced, and what does that mean for the AFCTA?
So we need to separate institutions here. The African Development Bank is a different institution with different mandate, with different performance metrics. The African Union, for me, as I observed it, is not delivered. It's a big mammoth of an organization that has been unable to fund itself. We're talking about aid. A Pan-African organization should not be funded, of this type, should not be funded by. And it strikes me as not really being responsive to the realities of the continent. It's a cut and paste. To me, just because there's a European Union doesn't mean we have to have an African Union. We have bigger countries, which are almost continent size. You look like the DRC. The DRC should be a REC unto itself. So how do you, if the RECs are not working, how do you expect the AU to work at its own level? And if there is no calling out of, if there no would-be hegemon, so let me just compare. I think it's hard to talk about Africa in the vacuum. It's always better when you compare it. In Europe, you have big brothers. You have France, you have Germany. When a country is faltering, as in the case of the Mediterranean countries often, Spain, Greece, all these guys that struggle, Germany will come and say, get your house in order. Otherwise, we're not bailing you out. There are conditions. There is no will-be hegemon in Africa. There's nobody who's going to say, Malawi, fix your house, otherwise we won't bail you out. Nigeria cannot do it, South Africa cannot, DRC cannot do it. So what is the point of having such an organization?
Interesting. Anybody want to come in? Octavia, Ottaviano, you I think, are very well positioned to talk about these policy shifts and how does Africa pivot in the world of a renewed global trade regime to be most effective for itself?
Right. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Ottaviano Canuto, I'm a senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, also a non-resident senior fellow at Brookings Global, and a long time here in Washington, D.C., where I was one of the vice presidents and executive director at the World Bank. I've been vice president at the IDB as well, and executive director at the IMF. In a nutshell, let me just say two things about two important points that have already been mentioned. First of all, on the AFCTA as a landmark move, which is, let's say, the best thing to be done by the countries that comprise the AFCTA under the circumstances in which we have seen this retrenchment when it comes to trade policies abroad and so on. Having said that, as a Brazilian and having grown on endeavors to see integration in South America, like Mercosur and so on, I must remind myself and everyone of the agenda that has to be comprised for that to really be a full bloom, particularly the need to have a better physical integration among the countries involved. Otherwise, the gains from trade integration within the region are not obtained. The fact of the matter is that this additional agenda matters as well as the so-called behind the borders agenda, which has to be implemented so as to facilitate the communication of goods. Also, that's a good response by the countries in the region to this new environment. Also, a short comment on the AGOA and hopefully the non-application of the reciprocal tariffs, because by the way in which the reciprocal tariffs were defined, that formula based on contributions to the U.S. deficit, even though that's not the case for most countries in the region, but there are some cases that are obviously very vulnerable to that regard. That's the case of Lesotho and so on. Hopefully the unwinding of the reciprocal tariffs that we have seen goes all the way. With the difficulty that Mr. Trump has been doing this on a bilateral basis, as he did with the UK and with China, and hopefully something is agreed with South Africa now. But the fact of the matter is that all the others will have to wait for a moment in order to do this. So that's a reminder of how the uncertainty and the looming perils with respect to trade integration are still there. But a final point before I hand over on the critical minerals, which is important to highlight the difference in the approach between Mr. Trump and the previous government, Biden. Biden, for instance, signed off the minerals security partnership with Australia, Canada, and European Union. And whereas Mr. Trump probably will do it bilaterally, as he did in the case of Ukraine, as he talks about Greenland, and as he talks about other cases and so on. The point is, people focus very often on the technology competition between US and China on the forefront of the technological race, semiconductors, clean energy. Semiconductors were the lead by the US, obviously, and clean energy by China. But they always, people don't pay so much attention to the underlying strong race for the inputs for all those digital products, which is the mineral goods. China has clearly devised a strategy to deal with that by making investments, by not necessarily involving itself with the production. The production, they lead this to whoever is in charge. But the fact of the matter is that China mapped out, and to some extent, US and Europe have lagged behind in this regard. Now, apparently, it seems that the US is paying even more attention to it. And as a colleague of mine at the Policy Center, Sabrine Emran, and I stated in a Project Syndicate piece a couple of weeks ago, this is so important that to some extent, Africa's critical minerals may play an important role in the shape of global power because of that, right? Provided that it is well used in that regard. Africa is more or less home to roughly 30% of known mineral reserves. In some cases, you think of manganese, it's 85% of the world. Platinum and chromium, 80%. And there we go, cobalt. DRC has 70% of the known reserves of cobalt. So what's going forward, gives an opportunity for these countries to, let's say, if they can, of course, not simply stay on the stage of producing the raw critical minerals, but also working on the treatment. China has concentrated the 80% of the world capacity of refinement, and but obviously an important agenda for the future of African countries is to do that inside, to work on the refinement.
Thanks very much for that set of comments. We'll return to the subject of strategic minerals, I'm sure, and of the role of China and the relative positions of the United States and China, because it's a critical underpinning of where Africa finds itself. But Dave, can I just come to you to hear your comments on some of these issues? I don't want to steer you in a particular direction, but I'm keen to get you in the conversation.
Sure, thank you. Just to say a little bit about myself, I've recently stepped down from my role as the senior director at the National Endowment for Democracy. And I think in terms of the aid piece, I really would like to focus on that democracy and governance that was a very significant part of USAID's assistance to Africa over the last 40 years, really. I must say I sort of cut my teeth on this business in South Africa as an anti-apartheid activist, and I dare say that that assistance was very meaningful in the case of South Africa in moving it from a apartheid dictatorship to, I think the strongest democracy in Africa today. And so I would not discount the usefulness of the democracy and governance, and obviously, if Africa cannot get its democracy and governance right, then there are not going to be a lot of American businessmen or international investors that are going to be interested in getting into Africa. I think that's been a big obstacle. Of course, now that the current administration has said that corrupt practices are no longer verboten, then we'll see what the business environment is like. But I think that it has been very important. When I first traveled to Africa, visited Sudan in 1984, there was a horrific famine going on there. I, witnessed these massive refugee camps, children starving in front of my eyes. 40 years later, I can see on television the exact same thing. So it does feel like there hasn't been a lot of progress on certain fronts. I don't want to be a downer, but I have to be honest. I mean, I think looking at the continent today, Trump administration, to my mind, has really abandoned Africa. Having dispensed with U.S. aid, having dispensed with the MCC, having closed down organizations like the Institute of Peace, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In this meeting that the president just had with Cyril Ramaphosa, I think is emblematic. The most important, most democratic country on the continent, and he insults them, on television. I thought it was just shameful. But I think that just signals the regard that the current administration has for Africa. I think that in terms of trade, that there's probably not a lot that Africa can expect from the United States. I think that already, China has, far surpassed American investment. I think Africans would be perfectly justified in looking to China or, of course, the UAE and the Arab states, Turkey, et cetera. And the United States is not going to be a player.
Well, maybe let me just come in, and I know Zeynep is very keen to make a retort. I think if you're just sort of surgical about it, coming from the markets, the truth is 25% of the world's economy is in the United States. Africa cannot ignore it. And for the United States businesses and the 600 multinationals invested in South Africa from the US, for example, the financial markets, the industrial opportunity, the economic opportunity means there will be a relationship, independent of what administration is in place, between US business and African businesses. What was particularly notable was in the conversation yesterday, there was no mention of the fact that the South African rand is one of the most traded emerging market currencies in the world. The institutions, Wellington, Fidelity Capital, all these institutions love trading South African assets because they can get in and get out. The companies are very large, very liquid, very sophisticated. The market cap of South Africa's Johannesburg Stock Exchange is 2.5 times South Africa's GDP, the highest ratio of market cap to GDP in the world. So this sophisticated financial market is a backdrop for opportunity independent of the administrations. I'm just mentioning that to give it some balance, and hopefully we can revisit this. Zeynep, I know you want to come in.
Yeah, I know you encouraged us to kind of respond to also what we hear from fellow panelists. So, I hear what Dave is saying, but I wouldn't go as far as like reducing the entire US scope of US engagement to USAID. I think that is also precisely the problem, that we're viewing Africa through the lens of aid and humanitarian assistance. That is not the only, tool or mechanism for US engagement with Africa. Sure, we're not happy with the dismantling of USAID. MCC right now is in disarray. The DFC is going to be much larger, is going to engage in Africa. So that, that's something that needs to be very, very clear. Also to say that the administration has completely abandoned Africa. We're just kind of 3 months in. There is a senior advisor for Africa. The State Department just released a commercial diplomacy strategy for Africa. But I think kind of stepping away from the details here, the Trump administration is completely overhauling its relations with the entire world. Right, you look at the Americas, Canada, Mexico, that had a rock-solid trade agreement with the US, the USMCA. That means nothing right now. All of that is being negotiated. The EU, the UK. So it's not just Africa, and I'm saying this point because if we think that Africa alone is being targeted, it's going to induce fatalism in us, and we will not be able to see opportunities for renegotiating the relationship. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is with respect to trade. Again, the US is completely overhauling its global trade relations, including with Africa. The reciprocal tariffs that have been announced on 57 countries, 21 of which are in Africa. We'll have to wait to see until July 8th what happens with them. But what I want to say is that as much as Africa needs to focus on the AFCFTA, it absolutely cannot ignore the US market, because history shows that if you want to pursue export-oriented industrialization, you do need market access. So in the medium term, at least, Africa needs market access. How does that happen? Think about how African countries can organize themselves to negotiate, because that's what President Trump says he wants. And that's why what happens with South Africa is very, very important for a lot of countries to follow. Finally, on AGOA, again, I would not pronounce AGOA as dead. Sure, there's a lot of uncertainty to the future of AGOA right now, but everything is up for negotiation, right? So why don't countries, the African countries, African government, the African Union organize themselves and go and see how they can negotiate to resuscitate, revive, and rethink AGOA and repurpose it? Those are the things I want.
So we've got to the time where I'm going to engage the audience with some questions. We have some virtual online questions, and we have some, I think, in-room questions. So I'm going to take the in-room questions first. But let me say, online, people really want to understand this question of AGOA and what the future of AGOA is. So let's work that into our answers. Online, if you want to ask a question, please go to ask with a capital A, Atlantic Council, capital A, capital C.org, askac.org, if you want to send your questions. So there's a question. I'm going to come to you, Mr. Ambassador, afterwards. Just the first question. I'm going to take 3 questions at the same time. Okay. Please introduce yourself and use the mic. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Professor Angela Pashayan from American University. Great to have all of you here. Thank you, Atlantic Council, for this day. I want to make a point to you, Mvemba, about having the countries just sort of fend for themselves. And I want to hear more about how you think that will play out. When I listen to the entire panel and I think about the things you were saying, I think about not being able to negotiate with Trump, which is what Zainab just said. I think about really no opportunity for countries to really come together as a bloc and trade. I think about no possibility for currency consistency for the business environment. I think about no foreign direct investment because countries aren't prepared for foreign investment. I think about no central organization to work with across different countries or groups of countries in the West or the East or Central Africa. I think about anarchy, where states are just vulnerable because everyone has to fend for themselves because there's no African Union or no Pan-African organizations. And I think that that could be a global security issue, that all the states are just sitting there vulnerable, trying to fend for themselves, while Arab states, China and Russia come in looking for the very minerals that you're talking about. So I want to hear a little bit more about what you think would happen if the states are all on their own without organizations like the African Union.
Thank you. Ambassador, you want to come in? Just please, questioners, if you could.
Yeah, I have a comment and a question at the same time. I will be very brief. Well, thank you. I agree with you all what you have said as a diagnosis of the situation. I think about aid today, really, we don't need any aid anymore. And this is my main message. We should do our own homework as Africans. We can rely on people who want to partner with us. But if we don't build, and this is, I think, it was said by my friend, if we don't build up regional integration scheme. For me also, ECOWAS was the best one, but today we have nothing. At the level of the Maghreb also, North Africa. If we don't connect the networks, and for that, what we need, in fact, is a vision, is a political commitment in Africa. We need the instruments, I personally believe that the free trade Africa will take some time to build up because we don't have the necessary tools. You were talking about democracy, good governance. And now when it comes to trade, Morocco is the only country in Africa that has an FTA. I can tell you, it's not easy. to have an FTA with the US. You have some non-tariff barriers. And these are very important issues when you come to negotiate issues dealing with climate change. So what I wanted to say, briefly, I will conclude by that we need to...
Take care of yourselves.
Yes.
Thank you. Mvemba, I think these questions are coming to you first, and we're going to take more.
Okay. Well, thank you, Professor. I'm not saying that there should not be any Pan-African type of institution. I just believe that Pan-Africanism has become a slogan that is meaningless. We've had 65 years of this. We know it doesn't work. Let's fix our neighborhood. And the neighborhoods are the regional economic communities. And neighborhoods will not work if countries are not serious domestically. Yeah? If there's nobody who can call them out and say, you want to be part of our neighborhoods, that's sweeping the driveway. Yeah? If we don't have that, then the value of the community goes down, and the value of the regional instrument goes down. And that's what we're seeing. So if there's any lesson to be picked from the conversation at the White House yesterday, is that countries that are prepared will not be bullied into all kinds of things. It doesn't matter if it's critical minerals. If President Tshisekedi wants to offer the minerals of DRC to the US, that's fine, but what does that mean for the people of DRC? Is there any civil society participation in that deal? I'm Congolese, I follow Congo. I cannot tell you what that deal will mean. Is the deal about peace? Is the deal about regime survival? Is the deal about value add? I don't know. Maybe all of the above. I don't know. But we cannot live like this as a society, as a country, as countries, and then claim Pan-Africanism. Yeah, region can negotiate because they're closer, they have same interests, they can have one message. ECOWAS can have one message, built maybe around the leadership of Senegal, of Nigeria. But there's Ghana, there is everybody else. That will make more sense than to try to pair up Nigeria and Malawi. They're not in the same neighborhood. They're not facing the same thing. They don't have nothing close. So that's what I'm saying. Cyril Ramaphosa, President Ramaphosa showed that yesterday. He came prepared. We saw a negotiator meeting a deal maker. That's what we saw yesterday. Zelensky didn't come prepared, and God bless him, but that was the first time we saw that playbook, right? So he was not prepared for that. People take note. And I think this should be the case for organization as well. And the AU is not prepared for that.
I'm going to come to Ottaviano. I just want to say, just practically, I think Ottaviano did touch on this. When you think about what the Chinese are doing in Africa, and I've followed them in my career for the last 25 years, they are very strategic, long-term, very detailed. So the reality is the Chinese enter a market, they build an airport and a stadium as a donation to the relationship. That's where they start. And every single country in Africa has that. Then they invest in the infrastructure, then in the strategic minerals. They buy companies, they build projects. They build projects for off-take agreements like iron ore, copper, so on and so forth. When Ottaviano was talking, he said for the African Union, for AfCFTA to work, we need to have integrated economies. You think about the European Union, the creation of the European currency only followed the integration of the European countries. We're very far away from that. So the policy shifts that Africa needs to make on its own to build the infrastructure, create the linkages, create the trade and the market access that we were talking about earlier is very critical. Now, Ottaviano, I'm going to pass on to you, but before I do that, I just want to familiarize yourself and the panel with some of the questions that I'm getting virtually. So one questioner anonymously asks, what is the role of the Africa diaspora in all of this? China is giving $500 million to the World Health Organization. What is the impact? What is the, what opportunity does a US-Africa summit in September present? And then do we expect AGOA to last. These are some of the questions on the virtual audience mind. Ottavio, do you want to come in?
Yeah, let me pick up two. On the comment on fragmentation, a couple of years ago, I was still at the World Bank when a very important report was made on fragmented Africa. Any one of us here who has once, just to a story, I was in Maputo and I had to go to Rwanda, but I had to fly myself to Belgium in order to come back to Rwanda. It's incredible how there is no, let's say, logistics connecting the countries. And without that, you don't have the kind of economic integration that you see in other regions. And inevitably, the infrastructure projects, given the size of the countries, typically, they will be cross-country. And that means the need for some sort of coordination, articulation among the countries, so as to have, any project to be financed, it will have the sharing of responsibilities and so on. So this is at most relevant in order for the AFSCTA to prosper and to give its results, including the behind-the-border agenda that has established and so on. The second point that I would like to make is on the carrots and sticks that the powers resort to in order to cajole and bring in the countries. In the case of the US, the problem as of now is the fact that Mr. Trump considers as a carrot the simple access to the US market. That's what he considers whereas the Chinese do more of the carrots of other manners and so on. And that may lead, as Mr. Trump is doing, prioritizing the bilateral relationships with other countries, to be seen whether it will, let's say, accept some sort of a negotiation with the AGOA countries together. And in this, the uncertainty is that, we are running out of time in the sense that, there's a deadline for the suspension of the reciprocal tariffs, and to the least, the 10% baseline will be there. And it's not practical to expect that individually, each one of our African countries would be able to start a negotiation such as this. So this is a looming uncertainty.
Can I ask, is it practical for 54 African nations to negotiate with the United States an agreement? Or is it that the African Union, which Mbemba thinks is not functional, can mandate 2 or 3 countries to do that on Africa's behalf? Isn't it more likely the latter?
Yes, it is. To be seen whether there will be the corresponding acceptance on the US side. That's part of the uncertainty we're living through. But definitely, but also the critical minerals will be on the they will be on the screen. They have to be part of the game. As Ukraine learned quite clearly, right? And the DRC has sent signals in that regard as well. The Chinese are there in the DRC. And even at a certain moment, as we know, Wagner was there. So, but now the DRC is signaling. So the critical minerals will be part of the basket of negotiation, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Dave, any comments?
Well, I think Africa is going to have to fend for itself a lot more than it has. I think that it's going to be critical for civil society to step up. In terms of American engagement, I think it's going to depend on the private sector, both a business, but also NGOs to really come in and strengthen, engage with Africa and strengthen our relationship. AGOA, I'm afraid, is probably a lost cause. I mean, my sense is that the trade with Africa has largely been in oil, some minerals, maybe a little bit of textiles, that was being helped with the AGOA. Like I say, I think Africa is going to have to look elsewhere at this stage.
Thank you. Zeinab, do you want to come in? I'm aware that we've got to round up very quickly. So last comment, what's your main message to the audience as we round up?
I guess maybe 2 or 3 key things. First of all, it's going to be important for people to realize that when it comes to Africa's relationship with the US, I wouldn't say that Africa is specifically being targeted. I want people to have that at the back of their minds, because once you have that mental shift, it allows you to see, sure, the challenges, but also the opportunities. I mean, you look at whether it's Ukraine with Zelensky and how he was treated, or Canada, or Mexico and a couple of other countries that were allies, and there's just a lot of uncertainty in that relationship. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that perhaps piggybacking on Vemba's point, that if there are indeed opportunities here to negotiate, countries have to be prepared. They absolutely have to be prepared, whether it's before the July 8th deadline when the pause on the reciprocal tariffs expires, or before the summit that is coming up. We don't know the date yet, the next US-Africa summit. They have to be prepared, understand the changes that are happening, understand the opportunities, but also put together teams, whether it's a business community, whether it's trade negotiators, put together teams that can actually engage these issues. And then the final thing is that, yes, indeed, there's a lot of uncertainty around AGOA, but AGOA is still not dead yet. Maybe it's on its deathbed. That I concede, but it's not dead yet. There's so much that can be negotiated, whether it's on an individual level, at a regional, sub-regional level, or at a continent-wide level. So those would be, I think, my 3 key messages.
Thank you. I mean, essentially, your message is Africa, of the panel, I think, is African nations need to organize amongst this uncertainty, get its own house in order in many respects, do what it can to leverage its offering, in particular strategic minerals, the infrastructure game, the fact that there's this population explosion, and industrialize on its own and seek a range of counterparties, of which the United States is one, but not the only one, to engage. So I think that's a critical. Vemba, can you make literally 30 seconds last comments, and then I have to round off, I'm afraid.
Sure.
We're running out of time.
Colin. I believe Africa is to be serious. In other words, go back to the drawing table and say, are we going to be a state? Because it starts at home. And if we're going to be a state, what state are we going to be? Are we going to serve our people? From there, everything else will flow. Until that happens, it will be problematic. It's going to be another 60 years of this.
Well, we've run out of time, but thank you so much to the panel. If we can give them a round of applause. Once again, thanks so much to the Policy Center for the New South, and Morocco's ambassador. Will you please send our greetings and our thanks for your continued support. I love Morocco, by the way. So I've been there many times. Okay, very good. Thank you to the audience, both online and present, for your contributions today. I'm sorry we couldn't take more of your questions. On the upcoming program, I have to do my duty and remind you of some very interesting opportunities. June 10th, in cooperation again with the Policy Center for the New South, the Africa Center will host a virtual event on marine energy and the power of the Atlantic. June 12th, some quick wins, economic opportunities in the DRC in the Atlantic Council studios. I'll be listening into that. June 17 to 18, Atlantic Council's Global Energy Forum at the Waldorf Astoria in Washington. That sounds very proper. So please do visit our website at the Atlantic Council and join the conversation and keep your interest in what's going to be an unfolding very interesting period for the world and for Africa in it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.